The Duke of Ravenshaw arrived as the autumn dusk was bleeding into the stone of Ashford Manor. He did not arrive, as a duke ought to, in a polished carriage with outriders, but on a single, mud-splattered bay that had clearly been ridden hard for days. He was a tall man, made taller by the grim set of his jaw and the exhaustion that shadowed his eyes. He dismounted without waiting for a groom, his gaze sweeping over the starved gardens and the moss-eaten balustrade with an expression Honora Croft could not immediately decipher. It was not pity, not quite. It was the look of a physician diagnosing a terminal illness. She met him on the cracked flagstones of the terrace, her hands tucked into the worn pockets of her apron. Behind her, through the open doors of the library, her uncle, Sir Gideon, was already pouring a drink he could not afford. The Duke's eyes found hers, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. "A Miss Croft?" His voice was low and rough, tired from the road. "I am Honora Croft, Your Grace," she said, her own voice steady. Composure was the only currency she had left. He gave a curt nod, his attention still cataloguing the decay around them. "I have ridden from Westmoreland 3 days." As Sir Gideon appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with drink and surprise. Your Grace, an unexpected honor. Had we known?" The Duke of Ravenshaw ignored him completely. His focus was a tangible thing. A weight settled entirely on Honora. "I have an estate," he said, the words stripped of all pleasantry. "It is in need of a mistress. I am told you are capable." The air went thin. It was not a proposal, it was a statement of fact, a transaction laid bare on the cold stone between them. Sir Gideon choked on his wine, sputtering, a dozen calculations flickering across his ruined face. But Honora felt a different kind of shock. It was a cold dread that tasted terrifyingly of hope. But to understand the look on her face, you must understand the year that had hollowed her out. You must understand the house that was dying around her and the man who was killing it. A year earlier, Ashford had still been breathing, however shallowly. It was her family home, but it had passed to her uncle upon her father's death, and with it, she had passed into his care as a poor relation, a companion, treated as little more than an unpaid housekeeper. Sir Gideon was a man who had inherited more debts of feeling than of money, and had discharged both badly. He saw the world as a series of opportunities for his own comfort, and Honora, with her quiet competence, was simply the most convenient of them. She managed the accounts, which was an exercise in fiction. She would stretch a pound until it screamed, finding ways to pay the grocer and the blacksmith from an estate account her uncle treated as his personal gambling fund. The tenants came to her with their trabeulsia, leaking roof, a sick cholia, because they knew Sir Gideon would dismiss them with a wave of his perfumed handkerchief. Honora would listen, her face a careful mask, and then find a way. She would sell a small piece of her late mother-in-law's lace to pay for slate tiles, or trade a volume of her father-in-law's beloved poetry for medicine. Each transaction was a small death, a chipping away of her own past to shore up a crumbling present. The house itself felt the neglect. Dust settled in the corners of the grand ballroom, where no one had danced in a decade. The damask curtains in the drawing room were faded by a sun that no longer warmed the room, only exposed its shabbiness. Honora fought a constant losing battle against the decay, her days a litany of small necessary tasks, mending the worn linen, polishing the silver her uncle might otherwise sell, ensuring the kitchen had enough firewood to last the week. The house was holding its breath, and she felt she was the only one left inside who remembered how to breathe. Her uncle's cruelty was not the grand theatrical kind. It was the slow, grinding cruelty of dismissal. He would praise her frugality in front of guests, then mock her for her mended gloves. He would compliment a meal she had carefully planned, from almost nothing, then remark that a woman so concerned with ledgers must have a heart to match. His favorite refrain, delivered with a smug little smile, echoed in her quietest moments. "A poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford." She had learned to have no opinions, at least none that were visible. She had learned to be useful, efficient, and silent. She had become the steady, beating heart of a house whose master had none. It was a slow, quiet ruin, and she was trapped within it. The Duke of Ravenshaw knew nothing of this, not really. But men are slow, child, and dukes are slowest of all. Yet sometimes they notice the one thing everyone else has taught themselves to ignore. Sebastian, Duke of Ravenshaw, had been in Bath not for the waters, but for the solicitors. He was a man drowning in his own grief, a widower whose grand estate, Ravenshaw, had become a monument to his late wife. The fires were never lit high enough, the curtains were always drawn, and his daughter, 7-year-old Cecily, had not spoken a word in the year since her mother had died. His house was not crumbling from lack of funds, but from a profound and chilling lack of life. He was sitting in the pump room, nursing a glass of mineral water he had no intention of finishing, when he overheard the conversation. Two local squires, red-faced and hearty, were complaining about their staff. My new steward is a fool," one grumbled. The man cannot tell a ledger from a laundry list." The other laughed. You think you have troubles. Think of Sir Gideon's niece at Ashford. The man is a sot and a gambler, and the whole place should have collapsed into dust by now. But that girl, she holds it together with thread and willpower. I pity the estate she manages. The words lodged in Sebastiana's mind. I pity the estate she manages. It was not a compliment to the woman, but a condemnation of her circumstances. He had heard of Ashford's decline. He had heard of Sir Gideon's reputation, but he had never heard of the niece. He saw her, in his mind's eye, a grey figure fighting a tide of ruin. He needed competence. His own household was adrift. His staff, accustomed to the gentle rule of his late wife, were lost. His brother-in-law, a man named Arthur Vance, circled with an air of predatory concern, suggesting tutors and governesses, all of whom Cecily had met with a wall of unnerving silence. Vance hinted that perhaps the management of the estate and the child was too much for a grieving man. The suggestions felt less like help and more like the patient tightening of a net. Sebastian was a man of action. He was not a man for courtship. For the delicate dance of society, he saw a problem, and he sought a solution. And the squire's words had presented him with a solution so stark and practical, it was almost brutal. He needed a woman of immense capability, one who would not be frightened by a silent house or a grieving child. He needed a manager, an ally. He did not, he told himself, need a wife in any romantic sense. He needed a duchess who understood the mechanics of a house, not the poetry of a heart. He left Bath the next morning. He rode for 3 days, stopping only when his horse required it. He was not riding toward a bride. He was riding toward a solution. He was riding to rescue a woman from a failing estate, so that she in turn might rescue his. And so he stood on the terrace at Ashford, his proposal laid out like a business contract. Sir Gideon, recovering his senses, stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "Ah, your grace, a duchess, my dear Honora. This is beyond all expectation. Of course, she accepts." "We accept." The Duke's gaze did not waver from Honora's face. He had not asked Sir Gideon. The man was irrelevant. Honora found her voice. It was quiet, but it cut through her uncle's blustering like glass. Uncle, would you be so good as to leave us? His Grace and I have matters to discuss. Sir Gideon scoffed. What is there to discuss? The Duke of Ravenshaw has offered you his hand." "Ah, he has offered me a position," Honora corrected, her eyes still locked with the Duke's. "And I will not have my references given by you." The insult, delivered so calmly, landed with the force of a slap. Sir Gideon's face purpled. For a moment it seemed he might refuse. But something in the Duke's silence, profound and dangerous stillness, seemed to convince him. He gave a stiff, angry bow and retreated into the house, slamming the library door behind him. The silence that fell was heavy with unspoken things. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. You will have conditions," the Duke stated. It was not a question. "I will," Honora said. She took a breath. The first truly deep breath she had taken in years. This man had ridden for 3 days. He was desperate, and a desperate man might just be an honest one. Before I answer, you will tell me the truth, all of it. I do not bargain with half a story." Yea, he watched her, his expression unreadable. He had expected tears, or gratitude, or feminine hysterics. He had not expected a negotiation. A flicker of something a respect, perhaps stirred in his tired eyes. Very well," he said. He told her of his wife's passing, of the silence that had fallen over Ravenshaw. He spoke of his daughter Cecily, and the wall of grief that surrounded her. And he told her of his brother-in-law, Mr. Vance, whose concern felt like a threat. My household requires a firm hand," he finished, "and my daughter requires a patience. I require an ally I can trust. I am offering you the title and all the protection that comes with it. In return, I need you to bring order to my house." She. It was the coldest, most honest proposal a woman had likely ever received. And for that reason, it was the first thing a man had said to her in years that she found herself wholly able to believe. Now it was her turn. If I agree," she said, her voice gaining strength. These are my terms. First, I will have complete authority over the household and its accounts. No decision will be countermanded. Not even by you, without discussion first." He nodded. "Adana second," she continued. "I am not a governess. I will not be tasked with affixing your daughter. I will be her stepmother. I will offer her kindness and stability, but I will not be expected to perform a miracle. Her grief is her own, and she will walk through it at her own pace." His jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "I would not ask for a miracle." "A good," Honora said a third, "and this is not negotiable. I will not enter your house and erase the memory of your late wife. Her portrait will remain. Her favorite music will be played if the child wishes it. Her memory will be honored. I am not a replacement. I am a successor. To pretend otherwise would be a cruelty to your daughter and an insult to the dead." This, at last, seemed to reach him. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, as if seeing past the worn apron and the tired lines around her eyes to the woman beneath. He had sought a manager. He had found a woman of profound and unexpected principle. Her name was Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet. She loved the morning sun. A fragile understanding passed between them. This would not be a marriage of passion. It might never be one of affection, but it could perhaps be one of mutual respect. And for Honora, who had been starved of respect for so long, it felt like a feast. "On my final condition," she said. We will be honest with one another. No polite fictions, no social evasions. Between us, in the walls of your home, we will have the truth." You drive a hard bargain, Miss Crofta," the Duke said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. "I have learned the value of a clear contract, Your Grace," she replied. "Do we have an agreement?" He held out his hand. It was not the gesture of a suitor, but of a partner sealing a pact. His hand was large and calloused from the reins. She placed her own in it. Her fingers were stained with ink from struggling with her ankles ledgers. We have an agreement, Lady Vane," he said, using the title that was not yet hers. It sounded like a key turning in a lock, releasing her from a prison she had long since stopped believing had a door. The journey to Ravenshaw was a blur of swift travel and strained silence. They were married by special license, in a small, dusty village church along the way. The only witnesses, a bewildered vicar and the Duca's grim-faced solicitor, who had met them with the necessary papers. The ring Sebastian placed on her finger was a simple gold band, cool and heavy. It felt less like a symbol of love, and more like the first payment in a long and complicated contract. Ravenshaw was nothing like Ashford. Where Ashford was crumbling into a gentle tragic decay, Ravenshaw was frozen in a state of perfect chilling preservation. It was a vast, magnificent house of pale gray stone that stood sentinel over a wind-swept park. But inside, the air was still and cold, even in the middle of the day. Heavy velvet curtains, the color of dried blood, were drawn against the light. The furniture was shrouded in dust covers in rooms that were not in use, which seemed to be most of them. The silence was absolute, broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, each tick marking a second of a life that felt suspended. It was a mausoleum, not a home. The staff lined up to meet her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and deep-seated skepticism. They were loyal to the memory of the late Duchess, and Honora knew they saw her as a usurper, a hired manager, with an unearned title. She did not try to win them with charm. She simply met the housekeeper's gaze, a formidable woman named Mrs. Gable, and spoke quietly. I am pleased to meet you all," she said. "I know. This is a difficult time of transition. I will rely on your expertise as I learn the ways of this house." It was an admission of her own ignorance, an offering of respect. It was not much, but it was a start. Her first meeting with the child, Cecily, took place in the nursery. It was a large, airy room at the top of the house, but its curtains too were drawn. The little girl sat on a window seat, a small, pale figure in a black dress. She was clutching a silver locket on a chain around her neck, her thumb rubbing over its surface in a continuous, worried motion. Her eyes, large and dark like her father's, were fixed on the world outside, a world she seemed to have no part in. She did not look at Honora when she entered. Honora did not force an introduction. She did not kneel and offer false smiles. She simply walked to the window, and without a word, pulled back the heavy curtains. Afternoon sunlight flooded the room, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Cecily flinched, her hand tightening on the locket, but she did not move. Your father told me your mother loved the morning sun," Honora said quietly, more to the room than to the child. "I imagine the afternoon sun is just as fine." She saw a stack of books on a small table, picked one up, and settled into a chair near the window, and began to read. She did not read aloud. She simply sat, a quiet and unobtrusive presence, sharing the light with the silent child. For the first hour, Cecily did not move. But then slowly, Honora saw the childa's head turn, just a fraction, her gaze flickering toward the book in Honora's hands. It was the beginning of her a quiet, patient campaign waged not with force, but with presence. She was the woman who stayed. Every day, she would spend an hour in the nursery, sometimes reading, sometimes mending, never demanding a single word or glance from the child. She was simply there, a fixed and predictable point in a world that had become terrifyingly unpredictable. Her first encounter with Arthur Vance came 2 days after her arrival. He appeared without being announced, striding into the morning room where Honora was reviewing the household accounts. He was a handsome man, impeccably dressed, with a smile that was all charm and no warmth. Your Grace," he said, bowing over her hand. The new Duchess. I am Arthur Vance, Eleanor's brother. I must confess, the whole county is abuzz. My brother-in-law is known for his decisiveness." The compliment was perfectly shaped, but it carried a barb. He was calling his brother-in-law impulsive and her an opportunist. "A Mr. Vance," Honora replied, withdrawing her hand. It is a pleasure." "The Duke has spoken of your concern for the family." "Of course," he said, his eyes scanning the ledgers on her desk. My sister's family. I feel a great responsibility, especially for little Cecily. One worries that so much Apala might be detrimental." His gaze was sharp, assessing. He was looking for a weakness, a chink in her composure. Honora gave him nothing. She simply met his gaze with a look of calm inquiry. A poor gentlewoman with opinions is a luxury no household can afford. She was no longer a poor gentlewoman. She could afford an opinion now. She simply chose not to share it with him. The Duke and I are both confident that stability is what the child needs most," she said. Which is precisely what we intend to provide." His smile tightened. He had expected to find a flustered, out-of-her-depth country mouse. He had not expected this quiet, unreadable composure. He saw then that she was not a temporary inconvenience. She was a problem. Honora felt his animosity, like a change in the roommate's temperature. This was the man Sebastian had warned her about. This was the threat. And she understood that her work here was twofold: to bring life back to a cold house, and to defend it from the enemy already within its walls. Her days settled into a rhythm. Mornings were spent with the Ledgers and Mrs. Gable. She learned that Ravenshaw was not just solvent, but wealthy. Yet she found oddities in the accounts: small disbursements and investments managed by Mr. Vance as a trustee of his late sister's estate, which now formed Cecilia's inheritance. The paperwork was all in order, meticulously so, but the returns on these investments seemed unusually poor. It was a small, nagging inconsistency, a thread she could not yet pull. She made quiet changes to the house. She had the dust covers removed, the curtains opened in every room. She discovered a conservatory, long neglected, and set the gardeners to work clearing the dead vines and cleaning the glass. She found the late Duchess's book of pressed flowers, a beautiful, leather-bound volume, and left it open on a table in the morning room. Small acts of resurrection, breathing life back into the frozen lungs of the house. Sebastian watched her. This was his first shift in perspective, the move from seeing her as a solution to seeing her as a woman. He would find her in the library late at night, a single candle burning, her brow furrowed over the estate accounts. He had hired her for her competence, but he had not anticipated the fierce, quiet dedication she brought to the task. She was not just managing, she was caring. He noticed other things, too. He noticed the way she spoke to the servants, with a quiet respect that was earning their loyalty far faster than any grand gestures would have. He noticed that she never tried to sit in his late wife's favorite chair by the fire, but chose another, tacitly acknowledging that some places were still sacred. He noticed, most of all, the way she was with Cecily. One afternoon, he came to the nursery doorway and stood, unseen. Honora was not reading. She was on the floor, carefully cleaning the delicate painted face of a porcelain doll that had belonged to Cecilia's mother. Cecily sat on the window seat watching. As Sebastian stood there, the child slipped off her perch, walked over, and laid a tiny embroidered handkerchief on the floor beside Honora, an offering. Honora simply nodded her thanks and used it to polish the doll's tiny shoe. No words were exchanged, but it was the first conversation he had witnessed his daughter have in a year. He felt a crack in the ice that had encased his heart. He had brought this woman here to be an ally, a duchess, a manager. He had not expected her to be a beacon of quiet, persistent light in the suffocating darkness of his grief. The thaw, when it came, started not with a flood, but with a single note of music. Honora had discovered a spinet in a disused parlor, and with it, a book of sheet music. One of the pieces was a simple lullaby, the page more worn than the others. She guessed, correctly, that it had been a favorite of the late Duchess. One evening, as she sat her usual vigil in the nursery, she began to hum the tune under her breath. It was a soft, hesitant sound. Across the room, Cecily went completely still. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide, with a look of shocked recognition. Her hand flew to the locket at her throat. Honora did not press. She finished the melody and then fell silent, returning to her book as if nothing had happened. For 2 days, nothing changed. Then, on the third afternoon, as Honora sat reading, she heard it. A tiny, faint sound from the window seat. It was a single wavering note, then another. Cecily was humming. She was humming the lullaby, her voice thin and fragile, like spun glass. Honora did not look up. She did not startle the moment into flight. She simply kept reading, but her own heart felt as if it might burst. The silence had been broken. Later that week, a fierce autumn storm rolled in, trapping them all within the house. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled around the stone chimneys. A sudden, violent crack of thunder shook the manor to its foundations. A moment later, the nursery door flew open, and Cecily ran out, her face pale with terror. But she did not run toward her father's study. She ran straight to the morning room, where Honora was working, and buried her face in the folds of Honora's skirt, her small body trembling. Honora wrapped her arms around the child, holding her close. Sebastian appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. He stopped dead, watching the scene. He saw his daughter, who had held herself apart from everyone, clinging to his new wife. He saw Honora murmuring to her hand stroking the childa's hair, and he saw that he, the childa's own father, was a stranger to her comfort. When the storm had passed and Cecily was calm, again asleep in her bed, Sebastian found Honora in the library. The fire was lit against the chill of the evening, its light dancing on the spines of 1,000 silent books. "I saw her," he said, his voice raw. "She came to you." She was frightened," Honora said, simply. She has been frightened for a year," he replied. She has never come to me." He walked to the window, staring out into the rain-washed darkness. "I have failed her. When Eleanor died, I sealed myself away. I thought I was protecting her from my grief, but I was only leaving her alone in hers. I did not know how to be a father and a duke at the same time. I fear I have failed at both, and team." It was the first time he had spoken to her of his own feelings, his own pain. The confession hung in the air between them, a thing of immense and terrible weight. Honora went to him, standing not too close, but near enough that he did not feel alone. You are not failing her, she said, her voice soft but firm. You are grieving, and you have given her a safe place to grieve to. You just needed someone to open the curtains." He turned to look at her, then, the firelight catching the moisture in his eyes. "I did not expect to care whether you stayed," he said, the admission costing him dearly. "A practical matter, I know," she said. "It is no longer a practical matter, Honora." The words were a seed, planted in the quiet, firelit room. It was not a declaration of love, but it was a confession of need, a need that went far beyond the management of a household. And in the warmth of the library, with the storm finally spent, Honora felt the first tentative bloom of a feeling she had long since believed she was incapable of, the feeling of being, against all odds, truly wanted. Arthur Vance saw the change. He saw the light returning to the house. He heard the whispers from the staff about the new Duchess's quiet competence. Most alarmingly, he heard from his spies in the nursery that the child was humming. He was losing his grip. His long-term plan to have Sebastian declared unfit due to his suffocating grief, and to have himself appointed guardian of Cecily and her vast inheritance was crumbling. Honora was not just an inconvenience, she was an obstacle that had to be removed. He decided to strike, and to do so publicly. The autumn assembly at the local market town was the perfect venue. It was the first time Honora had appeared in society as the new Duchess of Ravenshaw, and the ballroom was buzzing with whispers. Vance found her near the refreshment table, where she had retreated for a moment of quiet. He approached with his customary predatory smile. "Your Grace," he said, his voice just loud enough to be overheard by the surrounding matrons. "You are the talk of the evening." A veritable Cinderella story. Honora inclined her head, her expression serene. "I have always found fairy tales to be rather impractical, Mr. Vance." His smile tightened. "Indeed. But one must wonder at the speed of this arrangement, so beneficial for a lady of no prospects, arriving from an estate on the very brink of ruin. It speaks volumes of my brother-in-law's generous, if perhaps grief-stricken heart." The implication was clear and venomous. She was a fortune hunter who had taken advantage of a vulnerable man. The nearby ladies fell silent. their eyes wide with scandalized delight. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was attempting to destroy her reputation, to isolate her and paint her as a villain. Guilty of what? The old echo of her uncle's dismissals whispered in her mind, guilty of being capable, guilty of being chosen. Before she could form a reply, a low voice cut through the charged atmosphere. A cruelty seems already abundant this evening. Mr. Vance, I see no reason to add mine. As Sebastian was there standing behind her. He had appeared so silently, none had noticed his approach. His eyes were cold as winter ice, and they were fixed on his brother-in-law. He placed a hand on the small of Honora's back, a small, public gesture of possession and protection. My wife's former circumstances are a testament to her fortitude, not a mark against her character, the Duke continued, his voice carrying easily in the sudden hush. Qualities you would do well to study. He then turned to Honora, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. Your Grace, he said, offering his arm. I believe this is our dance. He led her to the center of the floor, leaving Arthur Vance standing alone. The orchestra struck up a waltz. As Sebastian took her in his arms, the entire ballroom seemed to fade away. He held her firmly, his hand warm and steady against hers. He will not succeed, Sebastian murmured, his voice for her ears alone. It is not me. He is trying to defeat, Honora replied, her gaze steady on his. It is you. She was right, of course. The public humiliation was merely a prelude. 2 weeks later, the true attack came. A solicitor arrived at Ravenshaw with a formal petition filed by Arthur Vance. He was seeking legal guardianship of his niece, Cecily, and control of her inheritance. The petition was a masterful work of fiction, filled with fabricated evidence and twisted truths. It painted Sebastian as a man lost in a morbid and unnatural grief whose judgment was so impaired that he had entered into a hasty and unsuitable marriage with a penniless adventuress. It claimed the child was neglected, isolated, and that her continued silence was proof of a deeply unhealthy environment. As a final, brutal stroke, it included falsified ledgers suggesting that funds from Cecilia's inheritance were being mismanaged and diverted to prop up the Ravenshaw estate. The crime was that she had been chosen first. Vance was trying to undo it. The hearing was set for a month's time, to be held before a magistrate and the other trustees of the late Duchess's will. It was a declaration of war. Vance was moving to take everything: the child, the money, and the Duca's reputation. The month leading up to the hearing was a siege. Sebastiana's solicitors worked day and night, gathering evidence to refute Vance's claims. But Vance had been clever. He had been laying the groundwork for months, creating a paper trail of false concern and fabricated mismanagement. But he had made one critical error. He had underestimated Honora. He saw her as a social climber, a pretty face. He did not know that her true battlefield was not the ballroom, but the ledger. While Sebastian and his lawyers focused on the legal arguments, Honora locked herself in the estate office with years' worth of accounts from both Ravenshaw and the trust Vance managed. She worked relentlessly, her only companions the flickering candlelight and endless columns of numbers. She was searching for the lie, the one inconsistency that would unravel his entire scheme. She found it, not in the Ravenshaw books, but in the trust accounts. It was a series of investments in a shipping company, all perfectly documented. But Honora, who had learned frugality in the hardest of schools, had a feeling. She sent a quiet inquiry to a contact her father had once used in London. The reply came back 3 days before the hearing. The shipping company was real, but it was a shell. It owned no ships. Its only purpose was to exist on paper, a vessel into which money could be poured and then siphoned off. Arthur Vance had not been mismanaging his niece's inheritance. He had been systematically embezzling it for years. The forged ledgers, accusing Sebastian were a desperate attempt to cover his own crimes by preemptively destroying the Duke's credibility. She had him. The hearing took place in the county seat, in a sober, wood-paneled room that smelled of old paper and beeswax. The magistrate, Sir Roger Templeton, was a stern-faced man who prided himself on his impartiality. The other trustees were present, their faces grim. Arthur Vance sat with his solicitor, looking the very picture of concerned duty. Sebastian and Honora sat opposite, a portrait of embattled dignity. Vance's solicitor presented his case first. It was damning. He wove a narrative of a great man brought low by grief, of a child trapped in a house of sorrow, and of a new wife whose origins and motives were suspect. He presented the forged ledgers, which seemed to show a pattern of financial recklessness. When it was Sebastian's turn, his solicitor refuted the claims, point by point, but it was one Manos word against another's carefully constructed paper trail. The mood in the room was shifting against them. Honora could feel it. Then, Sir Roger turned to her. "Ah, Your Grace," he said, his tone not unkind. Mr. Vance's petition makes certain claims about your suitability. Would you care to respond?" This was her moment. She stood, not with the fire of a woman wronged, but with the quiet confidence of an accountant about to present an audit. Sir Roger," she began, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Vance's assessment of my suitability is a matter of his opinion. His assessment of the Ravenshaw finances, however, is a matter of fact, and his facts are wrong." She did not present her own ledgers. Instead, she walked to the table where Vance's evidence was laid out. She picked up the trust accounts he himself had submitted. "Mr. Vance's figures are compelling," she said, her voice ringing with a controlled irony, "but they are also fiction. If you would be so good as to turn to the disbursements for the North Star Shipping Concern, dated March the 10th, for the next 10 minutes, she spoke not of grief or suitability, but of numbers. With methodical precision, she unraveled Vance's entire scheme. She explained the shell company, the flow of funds, the way he had used his position as trustee to steal from the very child he claimed to be protecting. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The cold, hard truth of the numbers was more damning than any accusation. When she finished, a profound silence filled the room. Arthur Vance was ashen-faced. His carefully constructed world had been dismantled by a woman he had dismissed as a decorative fool. Sebastian rose to his feet. His voice, when he spoke, was filled with a quiet, terrible anger. Sir Roger, Mr. Vance accuses me of poor judgment. My only poor judgment was in trusting him for so long. In choosing to marry my wife." He turned and looked directly at Honora, his gaze holding hers across the room. "I secured not only my daughter's future, but the very honor of this family." She saw the truth. I was too blind with grief to see. Her presence at Ravenshaw is not a sign of my weakness. It is the single wisest decision I have made since my wife's death. It was a public declaration, a vindication that warmed Honora to her very soul. But the final, decisive blow did not come from a duke or a duchess. It came from a child. Sir Roger, looking shaken, cleared his throat. "In light of these revelations, there is the matter of the child's welfare. I would like to speak to her." Vance gave a faint, desperate smirk. A silent child could not testify. Cecily was brought in. She was a small, solemn figure, holding Honora's hand. She looked at the room full of somber-faced men, her eyes wide. "Cecily, my dear," Sir Roger said gently. "We are just trying to decide what is best for you. Can you tell me who takes care of you at Ravenshaw?" Cecily looked at her father. She looked at her uncle, whose face was a mask of strange charm. Then she looked up at Honora. She let go of Honora's hand, took a step forward, and faced the magistrate. For a moment, she was silent, and the hope in the room seemed to wither. Then she opened her mouth, and a small, clear voice filled the silence. My mama, my first mama." She sang "The Sun Up," the child said, her voice still rusty from disuse. She then turned her gaze, with all the chilling judgment of childhood innocence, directly on Arthur Vance. "You told me my voice was a poison," she said. "You said it made her tired." A collective intake of breath went around the room. The specific, private cruelty was now hideously public. Cecily turned back and walked to Honora, taking her hand again and holding it tight. Cecily said, her voice gaining strength, looking up at Honora with absolute trust. She told me it was a song. It was over. Arthur Vance was not just defeated. He was annihilated. Not by the law, not by a duke's power, but by the simple, devastating truth spoken by a child who had found her voice. That night, back in the library at Ravenshaw, the house was quieter than ever, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the peaceful silence that follows a storm. The fire was burning brightly, casting a warm glow over the room. Sebastian came to where Honora stood by the hearth. He looked at her, his face stripped of all its ducal armor. He looked for the first time like just a man who had been through a great and terrible battle, and had against all odds won on Honora. He began, his voice thick with emotion. When I came to Ashford, I offered you a contract. A position. It was the only language I thought I had left." He took a step closer, taking her hands in his. "I was a coward. I hid in my grief because it was easier than trying to live. You did not just manage an estate. You walked into a house full of silence, and you taught it how to breathe again. You gave my daughter back her voice. You gave me back my life." Quote, he looked down at their joined hands. "I love you," he said. The words were simple, unadorned, and held the weight of everything they had endured together. Honora felt tears welling in her eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed. "Do not say it, if it is only gratitude," she whispered. It was her last line of defense, the final shield of a woman who had never dared to believe she was wanted for herself alone. He lifted his hand and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "A gratitude is for what you have done," he said, his voice low and certain. "A love is for who you are. The woman who saw a broken house and was not afraid. The woman who looked at a duke and demanded the truth. The woman who taught my child that her voice was a song." He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, but of profound, bone-deep tenderness. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was the truth, finally spoken, in the quiet heart of the house she had saved. Months later, spring came to Ravenshaw. The gardens, under Honora's direction, were filled with early daffodils. Sunlight streamed through the clean panes of the conservatory, where Cecilia's laughter could often be heard. She was no longer a silent ghost, but a bright, inquisitive child whose humming was the new music of the house. The portrait of Eleanor, the first Duchess, still hung in the grand hall, her gentle smile looking down upon them. Honora would sometimes find Cecily standing before it, telling her first mother about her day. The memory was not erased, it was woven into the new life of the house, a treasured part of its history. One evening, Honora was in the nursery, helping Cecily press a primrose into the pages of her mother's flower book. Sebastian came to the doorway and simply watched them, a quiet, contented smile on his face. The cold, grieving Duke was gone, replaced by a man who had learned how to be a father again. Later, as Honora tucked Cecily into bed, the little girl threw her arms around her neck. "A good night, Mama," she whispered, the word as natural as breathing. Honora's heart felt full to bursting. She kissed the child's forehead and went downstairs to the library, where Sebastian was waiting. He stood and held out his hand to her. She took it, and they stood together before the fire, its warmth a reflection of the life that now filled every corner of the house. He had ridden 3 days to offer her an estate to manage. She had, in return, given him a home. She was not a replacement, not a bargain discharged. She was the woman who had seen the ruin and the grief, and had not turned away. She was the woman who stayed. What do you think is the truest form of love, at the grand passion, or the quiet, steady work of healing a broken heart? Let me know in the comments below. We hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more tales of love and redemption. And don't forget to tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you. We'll be back with another story for you very soon.